For many years, and as long as I used to remember, there's been this obsession in the Dragon Ball community. People trying to force the Z movies into the main timeline, like pieces of a puzzle that just never quite fit. Making up whole theories, timelines, and even what ifs. And I will admit, it was fun trying to do mental gymnastics and come up with any excuse to fit something that was just never meant to fit. As Akira Toriyama, the original author and father of the series, have stated that he sees the movies as simply alternative timelines to the main show. But of course, Dragon Ball fans cannot resist trying to prove that their own headcanons are the definitive truth, because nothing gives this fanbase more motivation than being told that's non-canon. Suddenly, everyone becomes a scholar, rewriting entire arcs just to prove their favorite movie definitely happened between, I don't know, episode 184 and 185. You know, during that one Tuesday Goku forgot to mention. They do that by blatantly rewrite established story elements in those movies just to prove that it definitely fits. And I'm guilty of this myself in the past when I used to be young, with trying to fit in Cooler in the 3-year training period before the android invasion, or how the first Broly movie takes place a few days before the Cell games. But in this video, I'm going to prove once and for all that even those movies cannot fit in the timeline. Even Wrath of the Dragon and Bojack Unbound aren't exempt from this. So we're going to look at the contradictions, the inconsistencies, the plot holes, and the size of Broly's biceps and prove once and for all that the Dragon Ball Z movies do not fit. They were never supposed to. And honestly, that's fine, because they still slap.
How can you slap?
Now we must establish something early on, that most Dragon Ball Z movies aren't written by the author himself. As I stated earlier, Toriyama himself views the movies as side stories. Think of them like alternate timelines or glorified what-if episodes, but with a much higher animation budget and zero concern for continuity. But sure, who cares about that? Let's just ignore it. Let's pretend we know better than the creator and try to wedge Dead Zone into the timeline anyway. Because hey, it happens before Raditz shows up, right?
Wrong!
Except it doesn't. Because the moment you look at the details, like really look, Dead Zone starts to fall apart faster than Toyotaro mentioning Beerus is stronger than Goku. So Dead Zone takes place shortly after the events of Dragon Ball Z. At least that's the general assumption. The movie centers around Garlic Jr., a villain who seeks to gather the Dragon Balls in order to wish for immortality. His plan? Exact revenge on Earth's guardian for denying his father the role of Kami. As a consequence, Gohan is kidnapped for the Dragon Ball that is on top of his hat. Goku and Piccolo reluctantly join forces to rescue him. Garlic Jr. eventually opens up the Dead Zone, a dark void meant to trap his enemies, but ends up getting sucked into it himself. Immortal but forever trapped. Now barring the last part, which sounds like something your ex would do, if you notice there is something fishy going on here. Gohan getting kidnapped? Check. Goku and Piccolo team up despite being enemies? Check. Gohan randomly explodes in rage mid-battle and saves the day? Also check. That's because Dead Zone is basically a parallel timeline version of episode 1 of Dragon Ball Z. Just swap Garlic Jr. for Raditz and it all lines up a little too neatly. Gohan is in danger, the adults reluctantly unite, and somehow the toddler becomes the MVP. Now you might say the obvious here, that Dead Zone could have taken place a year or maybe a few months before Raditz arrived. And trust me, that's exactly what I used to think too. But when you really pay attention to the dialogue in the original series, the theory does not hold up. For starters, it is heavily implied that Bulma hasn't seen Goku since the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai. Even more telling, when Goku reveals that Gohan is his son, everyone is completely shocked in the original series. That moment clearly shows this is the first time they're learning that Goku even has a kid, which means they never met Gohan in Dead Zone, or at least they never even knew about Gohan in Dead Zone. And Dead Zone couldn't even have happened before Raditz arrived because of that. Now sure, you could chalk this up to the characters having some kind of sudden group amnesia that conveniently lines up to let both events happen. But I'm afraid memory loss won't save Dead Zone from its biggest contradiction, the Dragon Balls. Garlic Jr. used the Dragon Balls in Dead Zone. That alone makes it impossible for Gohan to still have a 4-star Dragon Ball on his hat at the start of the Saiyan Saga. Because once the Dragon Balls are used, they turn to stone for an entire year, meaning Goku would have needed several months to gather them all again. And we all know that never happened. And let's not forget, it's implied Goku and Piccolo haven't even seen each other since their fight at the World Tournament. But in the Saiyan Saga, they meet and they team up like it's the first time. Put all this together and Dead Zone isn't just unlikely, it's impossible. It cannot happen. Now here's where I want to bring in an interesting theory. It's something pointed out by another YouTuber called Dragon Ball University, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense. Dead Zone and the arrival of Raditz weren't meant to happen one after the other. They were meant to happen on the same day but in two different timelines. Think about it. Both stories feature a powerful villain, one from Goku's past and the other from Piccolo's. Both involve Gohan getting kidnapped, and both force Goku and Piccolo to set their differences aside and team up. They're alternate beginnings to Dragon Ball Z, two sides of the same coin, but never meant to exist with each other. And honestly, this isn't anything new for Dragon Ball movies. The first 3 Dragon Ball movies were just retellings of sagas from the show, condensed, remixed, and aimed at kids who maybe hadn't seen the series. But once Dragon Ball Z started, there weren't any sagas left to retell. Screenwriter Takao Koyama had to come up with original plots based on what was happening in the anime at that exact moment. I'm neither reaching or using headcanon, because Koyama himself admitted that his movie scripts were constrained by the current events of the TV show. But nonetheless, this is a trend that you will keep noticing throughout watching this video. The World's Strongest might be the most unintentionally ahead of its time Dragon Ball movie. Unlike Dead Zone, which borrowed elements from the main story, like Raditz's setup, this one almost feels like the main story borrowed from it. A frozen villain revived by his loyal minion, a brain encased in machinery, a brilliant yet unhinged scientist, and a plan to use his brilliance for revenge against those who doubted him. Tell me that doesn't sound like an early draft of Dr. Gero. But to be fair, for every clever spark, the movie also trips over its own feet. Like the Bio Warriors, they're basically Cybermen wearing second-hand Halloween costumes. Piccolo even destroys one of them in a blatant copy-paste manner, where he grabs them by the hand, lifts them up in the air, and then eliminates them with a mouth blast. And speaking of our favorite aura farmer here, Piccolo is alive, which small detail shouldn't even be possible if we're following the main timeline, since he's still very dead at this point. It appears that continuity wasn't the only thing that took a snow day here. Now, putting my terrible puns aside, the cold truth about this movie is that it's nearly impossible to fit in the timeline. Because during the movie, Goku used the Spirit Bomb, which must mean it takes place after he learned it from King Kai. But in the series, after his resurrection, he immediately went on to fight Nappa and Vegeta. So maybe it happened after the fight against Vegeta. Well, it still wouldn't make sense because Piccolo appears in this movie when he should have been dead during the fight against Nappa. The World's Strongest also couldn't have taken place after the Namek Saga because Goku already have his Super Saiyan form, which he didn't use it at all in this movie. But more weirdly enough is that in the movie, we see Gohan having a flashback of Piccolo saving his life against Nappa during an early segment. So either Gohan could see into the multiverse, or this movie is simply a timeline where Piccolo managed to survive the assault against Nappa. And this means that the Dragon Team didn't need to go to Namek so early because of that, as they could have revived some of the warriors who only died once. Additionally, this movie was literally scripted before the Namek events in the anime, making the World's Strongest impossible to happen. But I must admit that I still love the movie. The icy settings, the oversized robot bodies, and the fact that this movie dared to throw in a mad scientist years before the show did, that's kind of brilliant. It's a weird frozen time capsule of DBZ's creativity, no pun intended, just with some questionable calendar management though. The Tree of Might is one of those Dragon Ball Z movies that feel both familiar and completely out of place at the same time. Released in 1990, it was the third DBZ movie. Toei Animation clearly wanted to capitalize on the momentum of the Saiyan saga. In fact, if you squint just a little, you can almost treat it like a what-if scenario. What if another Saiyan, one who looked suspiciously like Goku but was the complete antithesis of his character? And I'll be honest, it did very well with that premise, featuring Turles, a low-class Saiyan who looked identical to Goku. He originally worked under Frieza, but then went rogue and established his own army, creating what was known as the Turles Crusher Corps. His goal was simple: plant the Tree of Might. Let it drain the life energy of a planet, and then eat the fruit to gain absurd amounts of power. Basically, eat fruit, get jacked, conquer the universe. In his mind, this would make him eventually stronger than Frieza. But unfortunately for him, his existence in the main timeline is incredibly unlikely. Here's the problem. This movie collapses faster than Yamcha in a Cyberman fight once you try to fit it into the actual timeline. This is due to the fact that just like the previous movie, Goku demonstrates the Kaioken and Spirit Bomb ability, clearly establishing that this is after the Saiyan Saga. But the only time this movie could ever take place would be after the Namek events, since Piccolo and everyone is alive. So if you want to assume this movie somehow takes place in the main timeline, then it would have to be set after Namek. No exceptions, which means Piccolo would already be fused with Nail. Why does that matter? Because the power scaling in me has to tell you that Piccolo's strength should easily be well over 1 million, yet the movie doesn't reflect that at all. In fact, Turles casually checks his scouter and reads Piccolo's power level at a measly 18,000. To make matters worse, Turles, who himself was getting outclassed by Goku at only 30,000 before eating the fruit, manages to one-shot Piccolo like it's nothing. The math just doesn't add up. Additionally, Gohan's age rules out the post-Frieza period entirely, and just like I mentioned earlier, Turles openly acknowledges Frieza, claiming he wants to overthrow him, which creates even more contradictions. At the end of the day, there are simply too many plot holes for this story to fit anywhere. So just like the previous movie, this will have to be set in a timeline where Goku came earlier before his friends died, even before Yamcha dies in this instance. So fitting it in the timeline makes no sense. By the way, on another note, if you're curious why Turles and Goku look similar, then you can check my video on why Turles looks like Goku. It's a great video. After Tree of Might, Toei gave us the 4th Dragon Ball Z movie, Lord Slug. On paper, this one had some potential: a planet-invading army, a new villain with mysterious ties to Namek, and even the first appearance of Super Saiyan. Well, not really. I've explained this on many videos before, but the introduction of Super Saiyan in this movie was Toei Animation trying to beat the author Akira Toriyama to the punch by introducing their own version of Super Saiyan, as this movie was produced and aired literally in the same week before Akira Toriyama revealed Goku's Super Saiyan in the manga. This clearly shows how a misguided studio that doesn't rely on the author's vision fully would do, and I feel some of this translated a lot with Dragon Ball Super, a studio prioritizing profits over story integrity. But hey, that's for a different video. In this movie, Lord Slug is introduced as an ancient Namekian who survived the near extinction of his race. He was a super Namek since birth, essentially a mutant powerhouse with the ambition of conquering entire world. His plan was to terraform Earth into his personal playground and harvest its energy for his army. And honestly, it sounded decent as a villain motivation, until you realize it's basically just King Piccolo 2.0. But older, stronger, and somehow both more serious and less interesting at the same time. But that's not the main issue here. The story hinges on events that could only happen after the Frieza saga, and after Namek. And as you know, we already established that by this time, Goku already turned into the real Super Saiyan. In fact, dialogue in the movie suggests that these events also take after Namek, with King Kai suggesting that Lord Slug is even more stronger than Frieza himself. This leaves us with two possibilities. Either this movie is like the Tree of Might, a sort of sequel in a timeline where they never went to Namek, which could be supported by recurring elements like Gohan's pet dragon Icarus, who also debuted in Tree of Might. Or it's an alternative timeline where Goku defeated Frieza without turning Super Saiyan, possibly using the Spirit Bomb. Either way, whether you pick the former or the latter, there's no way this movie fits in the main timeline. It's impossible. Okay, this is where things get interesting, because when it comes to Cooler's revenge, things get a little different. Unlike Lord Slug, this movie actually feels like it could fit into the timeline without too many issues. In fact, with a few headcanons, one could argue that it might just have. Although, I definitely disagree, and I'll explain why soon. What's clear is that this story is set after the Frieza saga. In fact, the entire premise hinges on revenge. Enter Cooler, Frieza's older brother, a colder, more calculating, and arguably more ruthless version of the Emperor of the Universe. He is also stronger, shown through his ability to transcend Frieza's final form and reach a fifth. With this power, he overpowers Goku in strength and speed, and he's only defeated thanks to Goku reawakening Super Saiyan in what I would describe as one of the most amazing moments in Dragon Ball movie history. I honestly think this transformation looks cooler, no pun intended, than the one he underwent on Namek. But putting my hot takes aside, the big contradiction here becomes obvious. Goku's control over Super Saiyan. By this point in the story, he should have already mastered the form. When future Trunks meets him, we see that Goku can turn Super Saiyan at will, thanks to his training in space. Some fans try to explain this by saying the movie version of Goku was sloppy or simply not fighting at his best. But even then, it doesn't quite add up. The timeline just doesn't support it. Not only do we never get a flashback on how exactly Goku defeated Frieza, because like I said, it was already implied in the previous film that Goku might have never defeated Frieza using Super Saiyan, and possibly beat him with the Spirit Bomb. Also, Cooler already stated that Goku in his base form could have caused enough trouble to Frieza. Now, the Super Saiyan transformation isn't the only thing that is significant when it comes to disproving why this movie can never happen in the main timeline. Because I'd like to point what I believe is the main reason why this movie makes no sense, and that's Gohan's design. Gohan looks noticeably younger to how he looks when future Trunks appeared for the first time. In fact, Gohan's design is exactly how he looked on Namek, meaning this version of Gohan is likely Namek Gohan. He also mysteriously has his tail back again. Additionally, this movie features Icarus once again, connecting it to the previous two films. This to me can only mean that it's more safe to say that the Tree of Might, Lord Slug, and Cooler's Revenge are all connected together in the same movie timeline than to say that this movie could slot in before the Android saga. But let me know what you guys think. Do you agree or disagree? The Return of Cooler movie is one of my personal favorite DBZ movies of all time, which is why this will hurt me the most, because contrary to the overwhelming belief that this movie can happen, it's genuinely one of the least likely. On the surface, the movie seems like a natural follow-up to Cooler's Revenge. Cooler is back, rebuilt into a mechanical version of himself. He's here stronger than ever and ready to settle the score with Goku, so the setup is simple enough and straightforward. However, despite the simplicity of this movie, it actually makes absolutely no sense. This movie cannot happen, and it's one of the most problematic when it comes to trying to do so, and I will prove it. For starters, the movie takes place on New Namek, which had only been established after the events of the Frieza saga. By this point in the story, the Z Fighters should already be dealing with the androids, and yet here they are casually flying off into space with no mention of the looming threat on Earth. In fact, let's mention something that people often neglect when it comes to discussing Dragon Ball movies, and that's the production timeline. So when was this movie produced? This film was made in 1992, right when Piccolo was fighting against Imperfect Cell in the manga and when Vegeta just destroyed Android 19 in the anime. So tell me, please, oh dear sweet viewer, why on God's green earth is Dende here?
Why are you there?
Okay, for anyone who doesn't remember, Dende doesn't come to Earth and become Guardian until the Cell games, after Cell becomes perfect and after Goku and Gohan come outside the time chamber. So again, how does this Haiwan appear to be in the movie is baffling to me. You do realize the movie brought Dende 7 months before he even appeared in the manga, and more than a year when it comes to the anime. Okay, I know I'm being a little dramatic here. It's not that deep, because this could be easily explained by the fact that Toriyama could have easily told Toei about his plans of making Dende Guardian, or this was truly a coincidence, where Dende literally transcends continuity, which would be the most and only godly thing he's done, ironically. But I can still hear that some of you might say Dende appearing isn't an issue, as this movie has a much larger window to fit in the timeline. First of all, this movie cannot happen before the android invasion, not just because of Dende, but because Vegeta's already a Super Saiyan, and Goku doesn't even act surprised about it. That alone locks us into the post-Android 19 portion of the story, and that's exactly where everything completely collapses. During that stretch of time, Goku is out of commission with the heart virus. Once Goku wakes up, he teleports to where Vegeta and Trunks are, and Trunks confirms that Vegeta was standing in the mountains for days and hasn't moved a muscle. That's when Goku immediately took them both into the hyperbolic time chamber. There was no gap, no downtime, and no space trip window for this story to even take place. So, for this movie to happen, it will have to occur before the Cell games, which is the only time where something could happen off screen. But we have a Gohan-sized issue here. I mean, take a look. Gohan isn't a Super Saiyan. This is the part of the series where Goku and Gohan were Super Saiyans the whole time, and Gohan had short hair as well. So for anyone who used to cry that this movie can happen during the Cell games, clearly doesn't pay attention. But do you know, in spite of all of this, my biggest issue with this movie isn't really Gohan. It's honestly the power scaling is weird. Because if this movie was taking place in a similar time frame of when Vegeta beat Android 19, then Vegeta should be a lot stronger. I mean, Vegeta even intervenes and saves Goku in a very similar situation to the anime. The movie obviously does not shy away from this, hence the ripoff, Easter egg. So Vegeta should be at least a bit stronger than Goku here, unless you want to assume that the writer Koyama took into account Goku's Zenkai boost after surviving the heart virus. But even then, that doesn't forgive the bigger problem here, which is Piccolo. Piccolo was written to be significantly weaker in this movie. Let's not forget, in the show, he scares the Super Saiyan out of Vegeta after fusing with Kame. Yeah, I won't lie, the continuity for this movie is fucked, both figuratively and literally. The Super Android 13 movie clearly takes place during the Cell arc. The movie even opens up with Android 17 killing Dr. Gero, so we know that the events of the anime has progressed this far. But that is when the movie cuts away and there are no androids around. Goku isn't sick, everything seems safe, and future Trunks is just chilling like his own mother isn't alone in the future with 2 killer androids on the loose. First off, Goku's completely fine here. No heart virus, no bed rest. Just casually walking around the mall like he's on vacation. Meanwhile, in the actual story, he's supposed to be half dead. And Vegeta? Well, Vegeta's too busy creating what will become one of the most used meme templates for the next 20 years. I feel like somebody should make a video about that. This movie feels like it fits only as a what-if scenario. What if the Dragon Team somehow beat the androids? Because as you could notice, in this timeline we don't see Android 16. So this is where I'm going to theorize something. This is possibly a timeline where Cell didn't come from the future. And I'm going to explain that in a little bit. Because if you remember, during episode 139, Trunks, Gohan, and Bulma discovered a second identical time machine. This time machine came back 1 year before Trunks even came when he defeated Mecha Frieza, altering time events even further. So if Cell never arrived, then this movie's basically running on that alternate timeline. And honestly, the film kind of hints at this too, showing us Dr. Gero's other basement computer. I've already joked about this in another video that this is like a secret basement beneath the basement. Maybe it's not just a gag, or maybe the Z Fighters never found that original lab because there was no Cell to lead them to it. If you remember, Cell was the one who told Piccolo about it. And that is how these brand new androids got their chance to come out of nowhere. And if you really think about it, Android 13 kind of feels like Dr. Gero's beta test Cell. He literally powers up by absorbing the mechanical parts of 14 and 15, which turns him into Super Saiyan 13, basically a rough draft version of Perfect Cell, or a Super Saiyan looking android. But if we're running with the idea that this movie takes place in some alternate timeline where Cell never shown up, then maybe this was Gero's backup plan all along. Instead of bioengineering the ultimate life form, he was just out there cobbling together robots with a DIY fusion kit and hoping nobody noticed.
What is your gender? My gender? I'm a mechanic.
I genuinely like this theory that I came up with because I feel like a lot of Dragon Ball Z movies fit as what-ifs rather than convenient lost story media. Like, instead of trying to force them into the timeline, which never made sense anyway, it's a lot easier to look at them as alternate realities where things just played out differently, and Android 13 fits that perfectly as well. Therefore, the Super 13 movie absolutely can't happen. But can we say the same thing with the next two movies? Broly the Legendary Super Saiyan is a film that takes place during the Cell game saga, which made it convenient for us back in the day to justify its continuity by putting it during the 9-day period leading up to the Cell games. Goku and Gohan are out of the time chamber, and we finally see a Super Saiyan Gohan. His design in the movie is also consistent with the original timeline, clearly suggesting this was right after Goku and Gohan finished their training and before Goku sacrifices himself in the battle against Cell. So a natural assumption that will lead most fans to believe is that this movie could hypothetically be canon, while putting aside the fact that the character of Broly has already been reintroduced in Dragon Ball Super, which would be the easier way to disprove this movie. But as you guys know, I don't like to take the easier route, because the events of Broly the Legendary Super Saiyan could not happen. Once you realize the whole plot is basically held together with the duct tape the size of Vegeta's pride in this movie. In spite of its convenient placement, there are many plot holes. For starters, the movie literally opens up with Goku and Chi-Chi lining up for an interview to get Gohan into one of the top schools. And honestly, that's peak Chi-Chi. Of course she'd prioritize homework over saving the world. It's the most in-character thing she's ever done. But here's the problem. The rest of the world, well, they seem weirdly chill about the literal apocalypse. Cell has already announced the Cell games by now. Humanity is basically on death row. And yet, everyone's just out here treating it like a Sunday picnic. In the anime, we see cities evacuating, people panicking, and villages in fear. But here it's like, oh well, guess the bio-android might kill us all, but little Timmy still has soccer practice at 5. But whatever, let's all assume that conveniently, all of those people and all of these parents were dedicated to their children and didn't care. But I'm afraid we can't say the same thing about Vegeta. Yes, Vegeta appears to have an off day in the park in the beginning of the movie, and like I mentioned earlier, with Chi-Chi I can accept that. But with Vegeta, that's a little difficult, because with Vegeta, he would be training non-stop at this point. He wouldn't just sit idle and relax in the park, much less hop on a spaceship to some random planet and fight a guy he's never heard of. Oh wait, he does exactly that. So yeah, apparently Vegeta went from I'll surpass Kakarot if it kills me to sure, I'll go on a field trip to New Vegeta and become king. But I mean, to be fair, Paragus does not tolerate hairline discrimination. If you know, you know.
We want you to boogie down with us.
Men, boogie down with us! Send them dragon balls, boogie down with us!
He also does rage bait Vegeta in a way when he tells him about the legendary Super Saiyan that would destroy him with a flick of his wrist. So maybe it is possible? Well, not really, because there are two major red flags we need to talk about. The first one is that the power scaling in this movie doesn't line up with the main timeline. I've explained this with my movie villains ranked video, where I ranked all the villains from weakest to strongest. I said in that video that movie characters do not scale exactly to the main timeline. I mean, yes, the writer of the movies, Koyama, does draft similar variations and versions of the characters in the films, as he himself mentioned how he wasn't allowed to do something ahead of the anime. Well, I mean, except for that one time.
Why are you there?
So, if you're someone who always had the school of thought that Dragon Ball movies could fit in, they'd have to be not only narratively consistent, but also power consistent, which in some ways is just as important. Because in this movie, the version of Gohan that was drafted is significantly weaker to his anime counterpart. In the Cell games, Gohan is hyped up as the strongest fighter among the cast, even stronger than his father as a Super Saiyan. But in this movie, he's basically the kid in gym class who gets picked last. And to make it even worse, the anime has Goku and Gohan staying in Super Saiyan full time to master the form. But in this movie, they're just walking around in base like that training never happened. It undercuts the whole living as Super Saiyan's idea. So maybe Cell doesn't exist in this timeline? Either that, or maybe he was already defeated and Goku survived. I don't know, you tell me. So while Broly the Legendary Super Saiyan movie is hands down one of the best films, it still has one of the most classic Dragon Ball movie quirks. You know what I mean. Something that looks cool, works for the plot, but doesn't really exist in the actual canon. In this case, Broly gets taken out because Goku suddenly channels the energy of everyone around him, stacking it onto himself. and then one-shots Broly. Now, in the main series, this type of energy transfer doesn't happen. I mean, yes, you have the Spirit Bomb, sure, but I mean giving Goku a straight up stat boost because the squad decided to believe hard enough? I mean, that's strictly a movie thing, and it's not the first time either. Remember in Return of Cooler, when Goku and Cooler started teleport spamming into some alternate dimension where nobody else could see them fighting? That's not how instant transmission works in the show at all, but in the movie, hey, why not? These quirks are fun to watch, but they also remind you that sometimes the movie play the rule of cool without really caring about the continuity. And that's the thing, these little quirks are part of why Dragon Ball Z movies feel less like missing chapters and more like what-if scenarios. They bend the rules, they remix powers, and sometimes they just make up mechanics that never show up again. So this is why Broly just doesn't fit or happen in the main timeline. Okay, let's take a little detour with the OVA plan to eradicate the Super Saiyans, a story that thought the Ultimate Saiyan Killer should look like something Chi-Chi would keep in her drawer. The OVA centers around a tough scientist, Dr. Lychee. Moments before his death by the hands of the Saiyans, he activates a mutant revenge machine to wipe out the Saiyans. Totally not Dr. Mew here launches a device that gathers and amplifies the hatred of the Tuffle race, all of which eventually manifests into Hachiyak, a totally not baby, a monster fueled entirely by spite. The story sets him up as the ultimate Saiyan killer. Dr. Lychee is one of the only survivors of the Tuffle race, a race that once lived on planet Plant before the coming of the Saiyans. The Saiyans not only massacred the entire Tuffle race, but also stole their technology and conquered the planet, renaming it Planet Vegeta in honor of their king. Lychee managed to escape with a capsule and found refuge on the Dark Planet, a world at the end of the universe. His only wish was to eradicate the last remaining Saiyans. To do this, Dr. Lychee puts devices on Earth. These devices emit a special type of gas to destroy all life. Because apparently, revenge wasn't just about creating Hachiyak, it was also giving Earth the worst air quality rating in the galaxy. When Mr. Popo and Bulma find out that only few hours are left until the planet's destruction, Goku and his friends rush to destroy the evil devices located around the planet. They manage to destroy all but one that is protected by an impenetrable energy barrier. However, that is when we see past movie villains, well, except Frieza, or actually technically, Frieza is a movie villain. Anyways, Frieza, Cooler, Turles, and Lord Slug appear and engage the heroes in an individual fight. It is revealed then by King Kai that the villains are Ghost Warriors. This interestingly reinforces that Dragon Ball movie villains do connect to each other. After the help of the brilliant Bulma, the Dragon Team managed to overcome the Ghost Warriors, and then the heroes track Dr. Lychee. They track him and find him in the Dark Planet, discovering that his Ghost Warriors are generated by a machine called the Hachiyak. After they manage to destroy not Dr. Mew, Dr. Lychee's spites towards the Saiyan causes Not Baby to exceed its limit and appear in a powerful android body, whose power was described to be more powerful than Broly according to Goku. This is such an interesting statement, because even though we know that typically the newer movie villains are more powerful than the older ones, here Goku directly references the previous movie boss villain. I generally don't remember that happening often, if at all. This clearly connects this to the same timeline as Broly, unless you'd like to believe this is also an alternate timeline with a different unseen Broly, which honestly sounds to me like fans trying to cope that Broly isn't stronger. But regardless, the very fact that this movie shares many of the similarities in terms of placement that Broly did, and also adding the fact that this OVA connects to older movies immediately makes it unlikely to happen. I'm not even going to point out how it makes no sense how they managed to defeat Hachiyak, who's supposed to be stronger than Broly, so yeah, this OVA is impossible to happen. Bojack Unbound is a unique case. It actually feels like one of the rare DBZ movies that actually tries to tie into the main story. The setup takes place right after the Cell Games during this big intergalactic martial arts tournament held on Earth. The villains here are led by Bojack, who's basically an ancient galactic conqueror that was sealed away by the Kais, and only freed because of Goku's sacrifice during the Cell Games, which means this movie acknowledges those events during the Cell Games, hence why King Kai and Goku have their halo. This movie itself plays like almost a coming of age for Gohan. For the first time, he's forced to take the mantle of Earth's first line of defense. And when he finally snaps into Super Saiyan 2, it's less about raw spectacle and more about confirming that Gohan really is the one carrying the torch now. Out of all the Z movies, this one might feel the most canon adjacent. It has the setting, the characters, and the emotional context to actually fit. Even Vegeta seems to be disconnected from his usual self, as if he lost the drive to fight. This is a direct consequence of how Vegeta felt after dealing with the loss of his rival, something that we have never even seen in the Bojack. Since this movie takes place shortly after the Cell games, we see Vegeta still coping with the loss of his rival. For years, his identity was forged in the fire of a single pursuit, to surpass the man who unknowingly gave his pain direction. Goku was more than a rival, he was the measure of Vegeta's worth, the one obstacle that justified his pride and pain. So when we see Vegeta sitting around, it almost shows how Vegeta is still dealing with his loss. Now, in spite of all those plot points that is unusually consistent with the anime, I'm afraid that I can still point to at least 3 things that make this movie impossible to happen. The first 2 are minor, but combined with the last point would give enough support to why this movie doesn't occur in the main timeline. First of all, during this movie, Mr. Satan recognizes the Z Fighters as the same people who defeated Cell. In fact, his reaction is consistent with his cowardly over-the-top personality. But that's exactly the problem, because in the World Tournament arc, which canonically takes place not long after this, Mr. Satan acts like it's the first time he's seeing this level of power since the Cell games. His whole shtick is actually built on denial and pretending he's the strongest. So if Bojack Unbound happened, Mr. Satan should already know what he's dealing with. Instead, it makes his later reaction feel like a continuity reset. The movie basically writes him into a corner, and then the main series just ignores it. Second, we got one of those infamous movie quirks that I talked about, rules that exist only in the movies and nowhere else. In this case, it's Goku literally breaking the laws of life and death. During the final act of the movie, he literally teleports from the afterlife itself to save Gohan. Now, if you're familiar with Dragon Ball's lore, you know this doesn't make sense. When you're dead, you just don't poof between dimensions on a whim. Even Goku couldn't do that. In fact, in Broly's second coming, the writers at least tried to explain Goku's sudden appearance by tying it to Shenron. Here though, nothing. Goku just warps in like the afterlife is a revolving door, helps his son, and then vanishes. Now, don't get me wrong. Conceptually, I think it's awesome that our MC literally defies the laws of the afterlife because he's trying to help his son.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
I personally wouldn't change this moment because we get Goku being a great father to Gohan like he always has been. However, when it comes to debating why this movie can happen, we have to admit that it's one of those moments that screams movie logic and the rule of cool we spoke of earlier.
I'm here to help you.
Aren't we enemies?
Nobody watched Dragon Ball. Let's go!
And then there is Trunks. This one almost feels funny because of how blatantly inconsistent it is. During the Cell games, Trunks has short hair, but in Bojack Unbound, he suddenly has long hair. Long enough that it would have taken him months, if not years to grow, which is a problem, because we know Trunks leaves the present almost immediately after the Cell games. He defeats the android and Cell in his own timeline and never returns, something Bulma herself confirms later in Dragon Ball Super. So how exactly do we get long-haired Trunks fighting in this movie? Well, the only 2 explanations are either A, Trunks grew his hair out instantly fast, cut it again and then left, which is ridiculous, or B, Trunks went back to the future, handled business, and then randomly returned for a surprise visit. But canonically, that second option never happens, meaning Trunks' entire appearance in Bojack Unbound contradicts the established timeline. Put all this together, Mr. Satan's broken continuity, Goku casually rewriting afterlife rules, and Trunks showing up with time travel hair that shouldn't exist, and it's clear this movie, like so many others, falls apart under scrutiny. On the surface, it looks like it could fit, but the second you press even a little, the timeline collapses, and that is why Bojack Unbound just can't happen. An abandoned space pod crashes into the frozen wilderness of Earth, its passenger barely clinging to life. Inside lies the legendary Super Saiyan. Scarred and broken from his last battle, he stays out of commission for 7 years, suspended in silence and slumber until much later Goten, Trunks, and Videl search the Dragon Balls in what starts out as nothing more than a playful scavenger hunt. But their search? it leads them into the very wilderness where Broly sleeps, and their innocent adventure awakens a nightmare from the past. Broly's back, stronger than ever. Thanks to his Zenkai boost, he could box against an adult Super Saiyan 2 Gohan. I've said this in many videos before, and I'll say it again, because people still fight me on this. Gohan was S.S.J 2 in this movie whether you like it or not. This is for the very fact that his design in the Daizenshu was stated to be S.S.J 2. The lack of blue lightning is merely an animation error, nothing more. But I digress, because the lack of blue lightning isn't the only thing missing in this movie, because placing it becomes a bit confusing the more you think about it. Now, even if we ignore the fact that we already disproved movie 8 as impossible to happen and how Broly's character has been reintroduced in the canon verse in Dragon Ball Super, we can still say that this movie can't happen in spite of that. First of all, Videl can fly and so does Goten. This clearly locks us in the post-Great Saiyaman saga, where Videl had her flight lessons with Gohan. She also has short hair, which fits that time frame as well. Also, for some weird reason, she's already familiar with Trunks in the movie. All of these details are supposed to help us anchor the movie in this timeline, but instead, they just raise more questions. Interestingly enough, in the game Boo's Fury, one of my personal favorites, the story tries to explain how this movie could fit into the timeline. In the game, Goku demonstrates Super Saiyan 3 to Trunks and Goten before heading off to the afterlife. Then Goten and Trunks go on their Dragon Ball scavenger hunt and eventually stumble upon Broly in the village. Sounds neat, right? Except here's the problem. If we're placing this after Goku's Super Saiyan 3 reveal, Gohan isn't supposed to be on Earth. He's supposed to be training with the Supreme Kai. So there's literally no way for him to appear in this movie. The game explanation is basically, well, Goku and Vegeta aren't around, so this must be the time. Which is about as convincing as saying, yeah, it makes sense, trust us. Let's set aside the fact that Vegeta's completely absent, implied to be dead or otherwise unavailable, and Goku's already dead, only showing up at the very end to lend a hand. The real kicker though is the Dragon Balls. In the anime, Videl never actually knows about the Dragon Balls until after the Majin Buu revival, specifically after the Majin Vegeta's rampage in the World Tournament. That's when she joins the others in hunting them down to undo the damage he caused. Yet in this movie, Videl not only knows about the Dragon Balls, but they're actually used. And that's a problem, because once the Dragon Balls are used, they can't be employed again for an entire year. That alone creates a timeline contradiction that can't be brushed aside. So just to be clear, I am not saying the movies shouldn't exist or aren't fun. My point isn't about whether this movie is canon or not. It's about timing, that even if you wanted this movie to fit perfectly into the timeline, it simply cannot. There's no room, no explanation, no clever workarounds that can make it line up with the main story. It's just impossible, and whatever solution you try to come up with in the comments down below, I'll be able to debunk it so easily. As with the past two Broly movies, Broly doesn't have a canon appearance in Dragon Ball Z, which immediately takes Bio Broly off the main timeline. However, if you need any more evidence, Android 18 plays a large role in the movie as she follows Mr. Satan and demands the prize money for letting him win the 25th martial arts tournament. But in the main anime, 18 stays with Bulma after the tournament and joins them in Kami's lookout until they're eventually killed by Buu. Also, Krillin appears in this movie. That is a huge red flag. Why is that, you might ask? Because Krillin left with Goku, Gohan, Vegeta, and Piccolo with the Supreme Kai to find Babadi's spaceship. Now, big deal, you might say. This could have still happened. Well, small issue here, but Krillin was turned into stone by Deborah and was only turned back to normal after Buu defeats the Demon King. During that time, Vegeta sacrifices himself and Goten and Trunks were knocked out by Vegeta, and Piccolo takes him to the lookout. There is literally no time for Goten, Trunks, and Krillin to be in this movie together, especially when this movie follows the plotline of the 25th martial arts tournament. Now, during my research with these movies, I often see people try to shoehorn these movies in the year gaps between arcs where things might have happened. For example, the 3-year gap between the arrival of Trunks and the android invasion, or the 7-year gap between Cell and Buu. And more criminally, people try to push these movies after the Kid Buu saga, meaning after the Buu arc ends. But this makes me question if they even watched the show, because in the movie Bio Broly, Goku has his halo, and we see that at the end of the movie. Also, Goten and Trunks should be able to fuse if this happened after the Kid Buu saga. But honestly, the real reason why Bio Broly shouldn't have happened is simple. It just shouldn't have. Fusion Reborn is one of my personal favorite Dragon Ball movies. It is the 12th movie installment and it introduces Janemba, a villain loosely inspired by Majin Buu. His first form mirrors that childlike chaotic energy of Majin Buu, playful, bizarre, but dangerously destructive. Janemba is more than just a monster, he's an embodiment of pure evil, formed when countless corrupted souls burst into the world all at once. His very existence warped the afterlife, twisting reality and bending matter to his own will. Janemba is destructive. He's a walking distortion of the universe, a monster who laughs as he breaks the rules of existence. At first, his childlike innocent form almost hides the horror within, but appearances means nothing here. Goku ascends to Super Saiyan 3 and unleashes an overwhelming barrage, only for Janemba to shed his skin and reveal his true self, Super Janemba, a demon of pure malice, sleek and terrifying. Janemba was so strong that he fodderizes Goku's Super Saiyan 3, a form so strong that it literally shook the afterlife, being able to affect a realm that is transcendental in size, as every universe in the macrocosm is described to be infinite and the other world is described to be beyond the concepts of space and time in this super exciting guide, being a realm that transcends the mortal universe. And all of that pales in comparison to the broken powers of Janemba. In fact, in order to beat Janemba, Goku and Vegeta had to summon an entity even more broken than him. From the pits of hell itself, we see Gogeta, the angel born in hell. Janemba, a being who could reshape the afterlife itself, couldn't even comprehend the speeds at which Gogeta dismantled him. In seconds, Janemba was erased, beaten, and undone at the molecular level by the first level of Super Saiyan. A villain forged from infinite evil, erased forever by divine retribution. Now, as you could tell, I absolutely love Fusion Reborn. Till this day, it has one of the best payoff endings to a Dragon Ball movie in my own opinion, and I will never stop glazing it in every single video. But of course, just like the previous movies, Fusion Reborn doesn't really have a place in the timeline. First of all, it is clear that this movie takes place after Majin Buu's revival. That is made obvious by Goku himself. He even states that when he faces Fat Janemba. Goku says he is the first opponent to push him into Super Saiyan 3 since Fat Buu. That not only confirms Buu existed in this continuity, but also locks us into a clear time frame. We also know Vegeta's dead in this movie, which makes sense. After he knocks out Goku, Vegeta went on to face Buu and sacrificed himself in an act of redemption. On top of that, Vegeta mentions that he already knows about Super Saiyan 3. This means that the events had to be after Goku's fight with Buu, and after he taught Goten and Trunks the fusion dance. In fact, Goten and Trunks already possesses the ability to fuse, which lines up perfectly. So if you're following along, you're probably thinking, this movie could have easily happened right after Goku's time on Earth ran out during the Buu saga. And interestingly enough, the game Buu's Fury agrees with you. It conveniently shoehorns the movie's event into that exact time placement. As soon as you finish the fight with Majin Buu, you play as Goku searching for Gohan in the afterlife. Since everyone assumed Gohan is dead, that's where the events of movie 12 unfold. And honestly, that little detail is one of the reasons I love Buu's Fury even more. I would have really loved it if they did that with the previous game Legacy of Goku 2, as we only had Cooler as the only movie secret boss fight. Now, in spite of the cool efforts of Buu's Fury here, we still have an issue, because this movie opens up with a Goku vs Pikkon fight in what looks like a rematch between them, which makes you question how is this even possible to occur in such a small window. Well, even if you somehow theorize that it could be due to time flowing differently in the afterlife or something, the biggest issue here is we have another Haiwan. Yes. Because this movie works around the fact that Goku went to look for Gohan. And if that was the case, then somebody should have told him that Gohan is right on Earth. Yeah.
Why are you there?
He's even in his Great Saiyaman outfit fighting crime, which, small detail, when Gohan returns to Earth to fight Super Buu, he not only returns as Ultimate Gohan, but the Earth that he's supposed to be protecting is already gone. Super Buu killed almost everyone, so there is no place for these events to occur. Additionally, with Dragon Ball Super, we can further proof even Gogeta never happened in this movie. This is for the very fact that when Goku and Vegeta fused in Fusion Reborn, they declared this to Janemba.
I am not Goku or Vegeta. I am Gogeta. It's over, Janemba. I come for you.
However, in the Dragon Ball Super Broly movie, when Gogeta's born, he says the following.
Using the Pataras, it was Vegeta, wasn't it? Okay then, how about,
Go.
Now hold on a sec. Having a name would definitely make us sound much cooler. This time it'll be Gokujo. How about Gogeta?
This clearly shows that these two Gogetas aren't the same. Even Vegeta had to be taught the fusion dance like it's his first time learning it in the movie. Let's not forget that Saiyans like Goku and Vegeta can copy moves instantly and learn it. So this means Vegeta never did fusion before. This alone puts the dagger into this movie. So what I believe happened here is that this movie operates on a hypothetical timeline where either one of those two things occurred. Either Gotenks destroyed Fat Buu before he went Super Buu, thus preventing the birth of Super Buu and humanity's demise, or that Ultimate Gohan came back and didn't mess around and finished the job, and afterwards used the Dragon Balls to bring back most people who died by the hands of Super Buu. Now you're going to tell me that the second option might be impossible since Vegeta is dead in the movie. Well, let's not forget that Shenron already brought Vegeta back to life during the Frieza saga, so he wouldn't be allowed to be wished back again as Shenron can't bring someone back more than once using the Dragon Balls. I personally think that either of those two scenarios are the only explanation to how these movies could occur. But you tell me what you think. Do you agree or disagree? The 13th Dragon Ball Z movie is the last OG movie from the 90s and is one of the rare cases of being a movie that could slot in perfectly in the timeline. That is because this movie takes place after the events of the Kid Buu saga. The film introduces a somewhat new concept for a villain, a giant monster. Okay, saying it like that makes it seem like it's boring, but bear with me. The Hirudegan monster is a thing of legend. His original role was being a demon god statue that purifies people's evil ki. But thanks to the Kashvars, they turned him into a phantom Majin, which basically started the systematic destruction of the entire universe. His single desire and function is to eliminate every living thing. He was so powerful to the point where the only way to stop him was to use an ancient magical weapon and cut him into two halves, and seal each half inside an ocarina. Then each legendary swordsman sealed himself inside a music box. Fast forward to the present, the Dragon Team uses Shenron to open the music box and release the legendary swordsman inside. By doing so, they accidentally managed to bring back the monster's other half. With Hirudegan being unleashed and being reunited with his other half, his original powers come back. But not only that, he managed to transform into a stronger form, being more powerful than a Super Saiyan 3 Gotenks. Hirudegan was only defeated after Goku discovers his weakness. He utilizes an opening in which Hirudegan isn't able to shift his phantom state. By doing so, Goku gives birth to his ultimate move, the Super Dragon Fist, a one-shot technique created after Goku makes contact. The energy of this attack is amplified far past its normal power, triggering an explosion of ki in the form of a golden shining dragon that resembles Shenron. The resulting collision of this attack was capable of completely obliterating the demon god. And now, as you can see, with Wrath of the Dragon, it's a bit different. Instead of movies that fit in the Dragon Ball timeline, we got a movie that happens right after the original series ends. Or rather, it's technically before the end of Z and after the Kid Buu events. So the movie doesn't try to rehash an existing villain or squeeze itself somewhere in the Buu saga timeline. Instead, it introduces something entirely new. A warrior sealed away in a music box, a mysterious old man, and a monster so massive it makes the other movie villains look tiny in comparison. Hirudegan is a towering demon who phases in and out of reality at will. He feels like the kind of boss you only fight once you've already beaten the game, and then the game laughs and throws the secret final boss at you anyways. Now, for years, the movie Wrath of the Dragon was accepted as possibly one of the very few DBZ movies that could happen without any issues, as there are no clear contradictions to its storyline. Like I mentioned, the story happens after the Buu saga events, so anything it introduces or tells could be justified as we have nothing to contradict it. In fact, back in the days, the only argument against this movie was one thing, and that was Tapion's sword, or rather, future Trunks' sword, as right at the conclusion of the movie, we see a scene where Tapion gives his own prized possession to Kid Trunks. Yes, Tapion gives Trunks his own sword. This was clearly an attempt by the movie to tell us the origin story of Trunks' sword. In fact, if you think this was just a coincidence, when the movie ends, the end credit scene rolls. Can you guess what happens? Yes, the first scene the credits shows us is future Trunks using the same sword that he used against Frieza, indicating that both swords are one and the same. Of course, this led to many fans to accept this theory, and I don't blame them because it sounds really cool and neat on paper. However, when you think about it just for a second, the whole theory falls apart. Kid Trunks having Tapion's sword doesn't explain how future Trunks ended up with the same sword in his timeline. In fact, it introduces even more question. Did future Trunks also meet Tapion in his own timeline? If not, where did his sword really come from? Instead of solving a mystery, the movie actually makes it more confusing. First of all, the sword itself is a normal blade without anything special. Akira Toriyama's original concept for the sword is that it was a regular sword with no magical properties. This was perfectly illustrated in the famous scene where King Colt asked to inspect the sword. Trunks hands the sword over without hesitation. Colt tries to turn the tables by striking him with it, and Trunks casually blocks the attack barehanded before ending him. The point was clear. The sword wasn't the source of his strength, it was just an accessory, something that made Trunks look stylish and unique. And if that wasn't enough proof, remember when Android 18 broke the so-called legendary weapon like it was cheap glass? That moment alone kills the idea that the sword was even some sort of ancient artifact tied to Tapion. However, I'll admit, the sword theory by itself is a weak one in this case, because in the original series when handling the anime, Akira Toriyama tends to retcon certain elements of the story. On the other hand, when it comes to the movies, Toriyama doesn't handle them, so trying to justify Tapion's sword with a Toriyama retcon doesn't really hold weight in this context, since it wasn't even written by him in the first place. But remember, my video itself is about whether these movies fit, not whether they're canon or not. And that's exactly what I'm going to point out here, as after years and years of believing this movie along Bojack Unbound could be the only two movies that could fit with the least issues, I have found another huge glaring flaw, and I'll show it to you before I tell you. You see this picture in front of you? This right here, ladies and gentlemen, is the biggest plot hole. Can you guess what's wrong here? Yup, it's the time machine. Why is that, you might ask? Well, that is because Tapion is using the second time machine that Bulma found. If you remember earlier in this video, I mentioned how future Trunks, Gohan, and Bulma stumbled into another time machine, the same one Cell came back from the future in. So in Wrath of the Dragon, Tapion is essentially using Cell's time machine and not a brand new one. However, this is impossible because in Dragon Ball Super during the Goku Black arc, Bulma herself admits how she couldn't fix the second time machine that Cell came from, thus proving this film never happened. So either you choose to believe that Dragon Ball Super isn't canon, or choose to believe what I've been preaching all along, that Wrath of the Dragon along all the DBZ movies happen in an alternate timeline. Doesn't mean they're not canon, it just means they don't fit the actual timeline. I've always loved the Dragon Ball movies, and I think the best way to enjoy them is to take them for what they are. Never designed to be dissected piece by piece or forced into the strict timeline of the series. Unlike something like Dragon Ball Super or even Daima, which are written with continuity in mind, the movies exist with a different purpose: to give us bold, self-contained stories that capture the raw energy of Dragon Ball. And when you look at them that way, it's hard not to love what they give us. These are the same films that gave us Goku's Dragon Fist tearing through Hirudegan, Gogeta's Stardust Breaker obliterating Janemba in an instant, Gohan stepping up to carry the torch in Bojack Unbound, and Broly himself unleashing a level of power and menace that still sends chills to my spine decades later. These aren't just side stories, they're some of the most unforgettable snapshots of Dragon Ball history. That's why I don't think we should worry too much about whether they fit or not. They were never supposed to. They're flashes of creativity, raw spectacle, and pure imagination moments that may not tie neatly into the bigger picture, but still capture everything we love about Dragon Ball. And honestly, that's what makes them timeless. That's what makes Dragon Fist one of Goku's best moves and Gogeta one of the best fusions in Dragon Ball history. So if you enjoyed this video, there are a lot more Dragon Ball content waiting for you on the channel. I've already made a full ranking of every movie villain from weakest to strongest, and I've also broken down the plots and stories of these films in detail. And if you like the storytelling aspect of this video, and the way we dive into the character and their journey, then I think you'd really enjoy my How series, where I explore how each character unlocked their iconic transformations. It's got that same mix of narrative and analysis, just with a different focus. So if you're someone who've been following me for a while and loves both the fun and depth of this series has to offer, there's plenty more for you here. So make sure to subscribe and like, and don't miss what's next. Peace.
Why are you there?